Hello kiddos of class 8, welcome to MATHMAN videos. The topic of today's video lecture is from the second unit, Social Issues. I'm going to start a reading which is titled as Oliver Asks for More. Well, the story Oliver Asks for More is an extract from the novel Oliver Twist, written by the English novelist Charles Dickens. In order to avoid the boredom associated with reading and explaining the text, I thought to give you an idea of the novel Oliver Twist itself. So before I start explaining the novel Oliver Twist, I'd like to give you a brief insight into the life and works of Charles Dickens. So without further ado, let's get started. Well, Charles John Huffam Dickens was a renowned British novelist, journalist, editor, illustrator, and also a social critic. He is remembered as one of the most influential writers of Victorian era. Dickens was born on 7th of February 1812 in Portsmouth on the southern coast of England. Dickens' father was John Dickens and his mother was Elizabeth Barrow. Dickens' father, John Dickens, worked as a clerk at the British Navy, and his mother, Elizabeth Barrow, aspired to become a teacher and a school director. Dickens was the second of 8 children in the family. Despite his parents' efforts, the family remained poor and impoverished. In the year 1816, the family moved to a place called Chatham in England, and the young Charles was allowed to roam freely and explore the countryside and old castle along with his siblings. This happiness did not last for long. By the year 1822, the family was back to square one because the financial conditions became dire. Dickens' father had a horrible habit of living beyond his means. He was a great spendthrift, which landed him in prison for his inability to repay the debts. Dickens' father was imprisoned in the year 1824 when Dickens was just 12. Due to this imprisonment, Charles was forced to leave the school and start working at a local shoe factory in London. While Charles worked at the local shoe factory, he had to face a lot of exploitation, humiliation, and betrayal from the adults whom he thought would take care of him. He was insulted, exploited, and cheated at the factory by the adults whom he thought would take care of him, whom he thought would worry about his studies. These sentiments of exploitation and betrayal became the recurring themes of most of his novels. Much to Charles' surprise, he was allowed to go back to school once again when his father was able to raise funds from the ancestral property. But again, the happiness of the family did not last long. When Charles was 15, he was once again forced to leave school and work as an office boy. When Charles started working as an office boy, the job proved to be the launching point of his writing career. While working as an office boy, he started to write for the popular newspapers of London. He also started freelance reporting. Besides reporting and writing for the newspapers, he also submitted few sketches to some of the magazines under a pen name or under a pseudonym of Boz. In the year 1836, Charles Dickens published his first novel, The Pickwick Papers. He published about 15 novels during his lifetime. Some of his famous novels include Oliver Twist, Great Expectations, Hard Times, Christmas Carol, Bleak House, David Copperfield, etc. Dickens married Catherine Hogarth shortly after the publication of his first novel, and the couple had a brood of 10 children. Dickens died on 9th of June 1870 at the age of 58. He died after suffering a stroke in England and was buried at the Poets' Corner, Westminster Abbey. Well, that was a brief insight into the life and works of the famous British novelist Charles Dickens. Now let us understand the novel Oliver Twist. Well, the novel Oliver Twist was published in the year 1838. It is not just a beautiful piece of work by Charles Dickens, it is also a social document because Dickens has depicted the plight and suffering of the poor children and also the underclass English people during the Victorian period. The novel is set in a workhouse of the Victorian England. An unknown woman is picked up from the streets and brought to a workhouse where she delivers a sickly child, a malnourished child called Oliver, and shortly dies after his birth. The identity of the woman is not known. The poor child is taken to the child farm which was led by the parish officials or the church officials. He was treated terribly and was fed very less at the child farm. The in charge of the child farm was Mrs. Mann, who was a very greedy woman who bet up the children for not working or for asking for little more food. Charles Dickens stayed at child farm until he was 8. When Charles turned 8, the in charge of the workhouse, Mr. Bumble, visits the child farm and decides to take Oliver back because he thinks that Oliver is old enough to start working in the workhouse. As soon as Oliver brought in the workhouse, he is presented in front of the board members or the parish officials who humiliate Oliver for not knowing the meaning of orphan, who thrust upon him the forced religiousness and ask him to start working. They ask him to start picking up oakum as a part of his work. Well, picking up oakum referred to separating the fibers from old ropes to be used in other purpose. In this way, Oliver was allowed to stay with other poor children in the workhouse. He was subjected to heavy work throughout the day and was fed very little. All the children starved of hunger. They were exploited and dominated by Mr. Bumble and other staff members of the workhouse. One day, all the children planned to ask for more food because all of them were starving. But nobody gathers the courage to go up to the master and ask for some more gruel. However, the little Oliver dares to go to the master and ask for some more gruel. Now this behavior or this habit of Oliver was treated as an unpardonable offense by the workhouse officials. The in charge of the workhouse, Mr. Bumble, beats him up for asking for more gruel. And Oliver is thus thrown in a dark room. Mr. Bumble then goes to the board officials or the parish officials and tells him about Oliver's blatancy. He tells them that Oliver had asked for more, and the board officials are shocked at this behavior of Oliver. They decide to sell Oliver away to whoever wants him as an apprentice. They offer £5 to whoever would come and take Oliver away. Now this decision changes Oliver's life. Eventually, Oliver is sent or is sold to an undertaker, Mr. Salisbury, whose profession was basically of making coffins. He was a coffin maker, and Oliver was sold to Mr. Salisbury. Oliver's life did not change at the Salisbury's shop. His life continued to be miserable. After being bullied by one of the children at the Salisbury's, Oliver turns frustrated and he decides to run away. He heads to London. When he reaches London, he met an odd-looking man called Artful Dodger, who helps Oliver by offering him some food and says that he would take Oliver to a gentleman who would help Oliver with a place to stay. Poor Oliver does not realize the evil intentions of Artful Dodger and accompanies him to a man called Fagin, who was the head of the criminals and the pickpockets. Well, the work of Fagin was to train children into pickpockets. He used to make them steal the things, and he used to sell the things stolen by them. When Oliver is brought to Fagin, the head of the gang of thieves and criminals, Fagin offers to help Oliver. Oliver doesn't realize his evil intentions until he was sent out on a theft mission along with Fagin's associates, Bates and Dodger. Oliver sees Bates and Dodger trying to steal an elderly man's handkerchief. The elderly man here was Mr. Brownlow. As the two thieves, Dodger and Bates, try to steal his handkerchief, the elderly man shouts. He cries out, as a result of which the two thieves start running and poor Oliver is arrested. However, Mr. Brownlow was kind enough to realize that the fact that Oliver was too innocent to be a pickpocket. Mr. Brownlow feels sorry for Oliver's condition and decides to take care of the child and educate him. One day when Mr. Brownlow sends Oliver to a local bookstore, Oliver encounters Nancy, who is one of Fagin's associates. Fagin and his gang was nervous because they thought that Oliver would rat them out to the police and they would end up in prison. Due to this terror, Fagin sent Nancy to bring Oliver back. Oliver was once again taken back to Fagin and was thrown in a dark room. Mr. Brownlow starts searching for poor Oliver. Mr. Brownlow is worried of the little innocent Oliver Twist. When Oliver is brought to the Fagin's place, he is thrown in a dark room until another thief, Bill Sykes, visits Fagin's and asks that he needs a small boy to help him in breaking into a household. Faggins then volunteers Oliver. He sends Oliver along with Bill Sykes and few of his associates on a second theft mission, which was sneaking into a household. The plan of the theft goes awry when the household members find out Oliver sneaking into the household. The poor Oliver is shot while Bill Sykes and others run from the place. However, the members of the household are the Mayleys. They were Mr. Losberne and Miss Rose Mayley. They were as kind as Mr. Brownlow. They realized that Oliver is just an innocent boy who was exploited. Realized that little Oliver is there against his will, and they take care of Oliver until he gets better. While Fagin and his associates are in the same terror of being caught, they worry that Oliver may rat them out or expose them to the police. In the terror, Fagin makes a mistake of revealing a secret in front of Nancy. He reveals a secret of a man called Monks who offered Fagin money to ruin Oliver's life. Monks was Oliver's half-brother, and he wanted to destroy all the evidences associated with Oliver's parentage so that Monks could enjoy the property himself, so that he could enjoy the family's inheritance himself. Mr. Fagin also says that Rose Maylie is actually Oliver's maternal aunt. When Nancy learns of this truth, she feels guilty for what she did, and she tries to unite with Miss Rose Maylie and warns her about Monk's worst intentions of ruining Oliver's life. She also reveals that Oliver is her nephew. When Bill Sikes learns about Nancy's help, he murders her. In the meanwhile, Oliver unites with Mr. Brownlow once again, and Brownlow gets to know everything about Oliver's parentage, because Mr. Brownlow was Monk's father's old friend. He knows everything about the evil nature of Monks. He realizes that Rose Maylie is Oliver's maternal aunt, and the novel ends with Fagin and his gang in prison. Bill Sikes dies shortly after murdering his friend Nancy. Monks also rots in prison, and with Mr. Brownlow legally adopting Oliver. He also offers him his share in the inheritance, and Oliver lives happily ever after. So that was the story of Oliver Twist. The major themes that the novel covers are the theme of child labor, exploitation, helplessness, and poverty. Charles Dickens has tried to expose the hypocrisies of the so-called Victorian workhouses which exploited the poor and the orphan children in the name of care and employment. Dickens shows the helplessness of poor children because throughout the novel we see that Oliver and other children in the workhouse are just helpless. They did not dare to ask for more food. They were dominated by the authorities. The helplessness and the powerlessness is also depicted by Charles Dickens. He challenges the so-called Victorian London. He puts out the evil side of London, which included exploitation, the recruitment of children as criminals, and also a major fact of child labor. That was all for today's video lecture. I hope you enjoyed watching it. We shall meet in the next video with some other topic. Until then, goodbye, take care.